So I feel like I owe a bit of an apology to those who are visiting this weekend, because my homily is not really a homily, or specifically reflecting the scriptures this weekend. As you're seeing is being handed out to all of you is a financial statement. So some of you are aware that a couple weeks ago we had a gathering for all of the parents of school children for a state of schools meeting, and within that meeting talked through a number of things, but the financials being one of them. And one of the questions that came up is, when is that being presented to the whole parish? And so that is my hope to talk a little bit about this morning. And so if you've gotten your sheet, this was put together by Phil Kirchhoff, who has helped for quite a few years with the budgeting and financials for the parish. And it was intended as a means of trying to simplify, because I know there's a lot of different experience in the depth of financial prowess in terms of people's education. And so this, as you see, is 6 columns representing the last 6 years of financials. The top half of the sheet in reference to the receipts, so the money that comes into the parish. The bottom half being our expenses, where that money is then spent. I'm not going to go through each of the lines, but I do encourage you to look over. If there are particular questions that don't get answered today, that I don't get to or miss, I would love to have conversations with people. Phil said he is very willing to have conversations. Jamie Jermark, who is also the business manager who put together a lot of these numbers, would also be there to ask or to answer questions. And if you're ready, their cell phone number, just kidding, I'm not going to give you that. But as you see in the last couple of years, just in reference to those top receipt lines, focusing in there because that's where we saw the biggest drop within the past year, is in envelope collection, which represents donations both here at Mass, but also donations that come into the parish on a regular basis. I put we have 2 asterisks on there, which represents a question that comes up. Is part of that drop is represented by a shifting of what is I Give Catholic. So the last 2 years we've had the I Give Catholic fundraising. The first year it was listed under the envelope collection, so that was 2021. That's where that first asterisk is. The second is in 2022, it was moved to bequest, donations, and miscellaneous receipts. So that's part of why those numbers are a little bit skewed, but that's not the full picture. We still saw a significant drop in envelope collections this past year. And so drawing your attention to the last line of receipts is the total parish receipts. You notice of all of the funds that have come in this year, if you look at the last 2021 and 2022, we saw a $100,000 decrease in the amount of receipts that we took in this year. Also drawing your attention to the school receipts. So a lot of questions come up about school expense and school receipts. So the school comes up with almost $700,000 towards its own expenses. So through tuition and other donations directed toward the school, that is where that money comes from. Moving to the expenses, there's a number of questions of where and why some of the expenses have increased, which has a little bit to do with the parish net revenue or deficit, which is on the bottom. But obviously this past year, having added another priest reflects an increase in clergy, but also an increase in insurance and utilities has been part of the increase. And then you'll probably notice on the second line of expenses, the last 3 years we've seen an increase in office expense. That is due to the hiring of a couple of positions over the last 3 years. Those positions, when I got here, were part of the strategic plan, which I got here, kind of looked at and had many conversations about. And it was in an attempt to fill in some gaps that were existing in the parish. And at that time, we were in a financial state where that seemed like something that we could take on. And so that is where the increase in office expense has come. You also draw our attention, so I mentioned the school receipts. As far as the school expenses, there's the high school and grade school. So 1.3, so 700,000 of the 1.3 million that the school expense is paid for by the school receipts. The other is subsidized through the parish. And so that's where that school. And so sometimes that's the question that comes up, and I've heard that concern over and over again as well. Father, we don't necessarily give to the parish because we don't send to the Catholic school. And we don't feel it just to have to pay for in a significant chunk of the Catholic school even being open. And I on one hand, I get that concern. The follow-up question that I have, though, is, okay, there's also another $300,000+ of expenses that are part of this parish that actually do go directly to your benefit. In fact, one of those positions that I referenced that we've hired in the last couple of years is a director of religious education, which is an investment in the education of all of our children, not just through the school. And my question is, who's paying for that salary? That is part of the reality of being a part of this parish community, is that we take on responsibility, all of us, for all of our education. So that is part of the expense that has come up. As you see on the very bottom line, the parish net revenue, so this past year, we were down $90,000, so in the red, $90,000. Those numbers were a bit of a surprise to me, and it was part of the presentation, as I said, to the school parents. And therefore, I think it's important to sort of just be transparent on that with all of you as well. And I know there's a lot of questions. Obviously, we are looking at expense and those questions of expenses. What are we spending money on? So that is one element of this, but it's also our expenses actually would have been okay if we hadn't seen a drop of $100,000 in the receipts within the parish. And so it's also a plea to all of us to reflect upon our call. Do we go to St. John the Baptist? Which is sometimes the word verbiage that we use. I go to St. John's. Or do we belong to St. John the Baptist parish? And I mean, it may not sound like much of a difference, but do we also see a responsibility ourselves in assisting this parish in its mission? Certainly its mission of education, its mission of evangelization. And I realize that many of you are the ones who are sacrificially giving to the project of restoration, and you're sacrificially giving on a regular basis. And so in that, I guess I definitely want to say thank you for so many of you that do that on a regular basis. My question, my plea is for all of us to reflect upon our call to be stewards. I remember just recently hearing the words of Father Mike Schmitz in a talk that he gave, and he said, we can oftentimes approach our possessions in one of two ways. We can approach them as the owner of our possessions, God, that we are the ones who have earned these things, our finances, our talents, our time. And as owner, we are the ones who make the decisions fully of where those things go. And we might decide that God can have some of that as owners. Or we approach it as the gospel calls us to approach it, which is as stewards. That ultimately everything that we have is a gift from God. And that yes, we put in effort of cooperation with God to increase that gift. But that ultimately that is God's, and that we have not only a call, but a spiritual responsibility to return, to make a return to God for all that He has given us. And I realize sometimes in the United States that's not a very popular message because it almost lends itself towards a mentality of socialism, which it absolutely is not. But it does force us to recognize, yeah, we put forth effort, but you actually have 2 legs and 2 arms and the ability to do the work that you do when many people don't. An acknowledgement of God in the gifts that we've been given, not just financially, but in our talents, in our time. And as stewards to make that return to God. Often we hear the words tithing. Tithing, traditionally, that word itself means 10%. The church actually doesn't require us to give 10% of our gross income. That's certainly one of the assessments traditionally that's looked at. But it's not a requirement. It's not necessarily required. What is required or expected is planned, consistent giving. And I know for many that's not how we give. We tend to give maybe from at the end of the month, at the end of the year, according to how things went, according to unexpected expenses. We often give from maybe the surplus as opposed to that it's planned, that it's consistent, and it matters not a valley or a mountain, whether we're struggling or whether we are flourishing, that we're giving. That's the reason for that is because that is the element of faith and trust that God asks of us. Sometimes I have to go around as priest and have conversations of asking people. It's what I dreamed about, becoming a priest. It was my favorite. And that's absolute sarcasm because this is the worst thing that I could imagine having to give a homily on right now. This whole thing. It's absolutely not. But in those talks, sometimes I ask for a gift for the project, the restoration, and sometimes the response is, yeah, Father, we wish we could, but we had all of our gifts are kind of planned out for this year. And in many ways, that's absolutely the right answer. So don't just start saying that to me, but anyway. But that's absolutely what we are called to, is that we are planning, that we are consistent with the ways that we give of what God has given us. A couple of questions that have come up in response. So we did have that parents of the school children and some of the questions that were posed. One is in reference to the restoration project. So you won't find the restoration numbers in here. It's kind of treated as a very separate thing. That's obviously the hope, is that we were able to do the restoration as a means of giving outside of normal giving. I know that presents a challenge. And in that, again, when it comes to the call of God, of the church, when it comes to what it is that you give planned and consistently, that's what each of us individually has to wrestle with. But one of the questions is, well, why are we doing a $3 million restoration of our church if this is where we are in the red financially? That's a valid question. So first of all, we were actually in pretty good financial shape for the last 2 years, according to estimation. Again, the idea of raising the funds for the project was outside of it, but the question actually came up and had added with it, including these copper gutters and drainage pipes. Is that necessary? So that's a good question. We're also a part of the Kansas Historical Society, St. John the Baptist Church, which what that actually brings with it is the possibility of certain benefits that we will receive as part of our restoration project. Actually, we have the possibility of receiving pretty substantial tax break benefits that would actually come back to us as a rebate on the project. But what that means is we have to actually stay within the approval of the Kansas Historical Society, which means same or like materials when it comes to construction. and that they have to approve everything that we do with the building to help retain its historical value as well. And so that's the reason for the particular materials. But the reason for the project, I think, as I've talked about, and it's probably ad nauseum the number of times that I make reference to the challenges of our parish and the divisions of our parish, and the challenges of just a wide variety of sort of cultures coming together here in Beloit, Kansas, is that I feel like this isn't just me, but that God is placing it upon my heart that for each and every one of us, as divided as certain elements of our life or of our community might be, that there is a common place, a common ground, a place where God calls us together. Right now it's the old Dollar General. But it's ultimately that building over there. And I realize, yeah, sometimes you even feel the divisions within that building over there. But if there's a place to be drawn together in a family of unity, I feel like it is committing ourselves to the restoring of that gift that was handed on to us by ancestors of this town. And to not just bandage it, but to restore it to the beauty that it was handed on. And in and of itself, making that gift to God. Yeah, we don't earn God's gift by shiny things, or we don't earn God's affirmation by spending lots of money. But it absolutely does something to us when we do that. When I wear shiny vestments and use shiny gold vessels, it doesn't impress God. But in the human psyche, it communicates that this is something set apart. This is something different. This isn't just a picnic at the park. This is the divine liturgy where we actually encounter the saints and the angels and God Himself in the altar. And there is no human value that can be placed on that. There's no dollar sign number that we could actually put on that. And so in restoring the beauty of our church, my hope is that it would be a unifying thing, but also a thing that reminds us that we're not made for this world. That our church building will remind us that we're made for the world to come. I think I'll just stop there.